All right, guys, we are officially here at the archive, welcoming you to the archive. And
Welcome.
first of all, just probably say a quick thank you to everybody who's been patiently waiting. We've spent months talking about this and putting in lots of hours of preparation and planning, and we're just finally at a point where we're just going for it. We're just gonna
Just doing it.
Yep,
Shout out to Isaac.
absolutely. He's been pressuring us very frequently. So we figured for the first episode we would just do a foundational episode of kind of our reason why we're doing this and what we represent and what our philosophy is and ultimately just what we're hoping to accomplish. And so, BJ has a lot to talk about. I have a lot to talk about. And for those of you who don't know, the original name for the archive was the Daily Discussion. It was solely me running the show, but BJ was a big part of it. But we eventually decided to partner up and create this impulse that is the archive. And a lot of you know this already, but I will just kind of briefly go over. The Daily Discussion was a place where we could challenge ideas that were even well established. I started to see all this rhetoric on the internet about settled science and trust the facts and people espousing ideas like absolute truth, which I kind of took issue with, and I wanted to show people that we can actually find at the pinnacle of most conversations a lot of contradictions and a lot of malleability within the truth. And that was kind of perfect for the time too, because Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris were ultimately having this conversation at a high level of, well, what is the truth and how do you define the truth?
And that brought out a lot of polarization. And
Right.
there was a lot of argumentation and a lot of people who were just at each other's throats and people who had a lot to say one way or the other. And I think that's kind of what spawned your passion for doing your podcast, the Daily Discussion. And I really enjoyed coming on there and talking with you. And for all the viewers out there, I mean, every time we got together and had a conversation about whatever it was, philosophy, religion, politics, it always had a great turnout.
Mm-hmm.
We always had fun. And so we decided that we wanted to do it together, and here we are.
And they were always the best received, and that's ultimately why we decided to partner up, and because we're really good friends and we have a good time talking about these things. And that's another thing too. When I started the podcast, I just wanted to talk to people who had perspectives that didn't necessarily align with mine, which is still a part of the philosophy of the archive, but we've kind of decided to take our goal to the next level and to a much more...
So we kind of blended my ideas about life and the world and philosophy and mixed it with Connor's ideas. And
Right.
it kind of, it spat out the archive. It's kind of our baby. So we're really excited. Thank you for listening. And this episode is just going to be about us talking about what we're doing. So
I guess we'll just jump right into the meat of it.
So I'll jump in first. Is that cool?
Yeah.
So essentially, our philosophy consists of a couple of things. One is the idea of discourse. It's the idea of being open to new ideas. Mm-hmm. It's the idea that, ideas are things that we can play with and things that we should play with, and we should be open to new ideas. Right. We'll talk about that a little later. Every one of these we'll talk about.
We also feel that people in this modern time tend to cling on to their ideas in such a way that is almost tribal, maybe not necessarily tribal, maybe that's a little hyperbolic, but at least in a way that is denying new information from coming and internalizing and being integrated in an ideological way. So
that's what you called out with the Daily Discussion,
right,
for sure. So that's definitely a huge part of what we're doing here, having discussions with people.
Right.
Another part of our philosophy is holistic and integral thinking, critical thought, thinking integrally and holistically, and we'll get into that later again. And then the third part and huge aspect of what we're trying to get across in our channel at large is the nature of self-study, reading for understanding versus reading for entertainment or even reading for knowledge and what that means, and a concept called the Great Conversation and the Great Books. And we will also, again, talk about that later. But all of these things sort of play into each other. Discourse, self-study, conversation, the Great Conversation, and holistic philosophy, integral philosophy. So we kind of wanted to make this channel all about those things in the best ways possible. And we have a couple of different actual segment types that we're going to be releasing, 4 major ones, actually. And we'll go ahead and get into that now.
Yeah, well, the flagship episode is going to be called The Union of Opposites. And that phrase is actually a meme that showed up in esoteric texts for a very long time. It's not a term that we necessarily coined, but what we've done is we've codified it into a video format. So ultimately what we're trying to do is we're trying to take two ideas that most people perceive as irreconcilable that are, opposites, and synergizing them into a nuanced middle ground.
Yep.
And we have quite a few outlines of that done already.
Oh, yeah.
We just need to record them, which we're going to be doing this week, and we're really excited about that one in particular. We also have a lecture series. We're also going to be doing book reviews. And then, of course, we want to maintain our roots by doing the Discourse, which is the standard discussion-based podcast that you would see on, Joe Rogan.
Or the Daily Discussion before we merged. And that being said, with the lecture series, it's kind of the idea behind it is a standard YouTube channel, basically. This podcast is going to go on all platforms. It'll be, audio only and video and audio. And there will be some subtle differences between the two, depending on which platforms we post on. So however you would prefer to listen, go ahead and let us know in the comments or whatever, and we'll have something for you. But the lecture series is definitely going to be more traditionally YouTube channel vibe with a lot of images and quotes and video clips. And the point of those is to sort of highlight our actual foundation, the ideas that we'll be discussing with other guests and amongst ourselves, Connor and I, in the Discourse episodes, as well as in the Union of Opposites episodes. We will basically hyperlink the lecture videos if they're obscure, if the topics are obscure. So perhaps maybe one day we want to talk about religion versus philosophy, some iteration of that.
Right.
And perhaps the philosophy that we're talking about is Hermeticism. Not a lot of people really have ever heard of Hermeticism or what that even is. So in order to just jump into the meat of it in those episodes, we'll just jump into the meat of it and we won't really give a whole lot of explanation. The lecture series is there for anyone who would like to learn these things. Again, sort of like a standard YouTube channel. Those videos will be nice and short and sweet, kind of give you the gist of what you need to know, and then you can jump back into the Discourse episodes after that and really go on that journey with us as we really unpack these ideas and really just have fun thinking about thinking.
Right, and we really hope to create a nexus of hyperlinked information with our YouTube channel so that you can reference back to certain ideas if it's not as well understood or established, in a way that allows people to navigate through in a structured way. So there's going to be multiple playlists for each segment type, as well as other content as well. So
yep. And then when we post to other platforms, we'll have to figure out kind of how that's going to work, and we'll let everybody know for sure, and they'll all be available to you no matter what. So I hope that you guys vibe with us, as well as, again, to back up a little bit real quick, we also have the book series that you mentioned, and the book reviews, in which we will be referencing titles that directly relate to the subject matter. So if we do an episode where we talk about philosophy versus religion, and during that conversation we bring up a text or some sort of actual proof or whatever it might be, some reason for why we're talking about it, and we maybe reference a specific philosopher and their work, we can always do a book review on that if it's really important to our actual foundation, our actual philosophy.
As well as a book club, hopefully soon.
Yeah, there's a lot coming in the way of like a lot of engagement, talking with you guys, figuring out how we're going to be able to really just engage and talk about books, and we'll be sharing that and linking those to the videos. It's going to be awesome.
And one last thing I want to say about that too is the idea of having a conversation in such a way that's not trying to sell somebody, but trying to offer perspective. And we want to do that with you guys just as much as you want to do that with us. And so we're hoping to embody that principle when we do our podcast. And I think that kind of brings us to the great conversation, which, for those of you who don't know, our new slogan is continuing the great conversation.
Yes. And that was something that we came up with after a long process of really thinking about what it is that we want to embody as a channel, as a whole channel. And whereas, again, the daily discussion was all about conversing with people and challenging each other and debating and like really going to bat to protect our ideas, as well as being open to new ideas, sort of on like in the battleground of sorts of thinking, this channel is now still that, but again, it's a little more nuanced. And the concept of the great conversation is something that was actually coined by a group who... In that group includes Mortimer J. Adler, who is the man who put together this entire book series behind me called The Great Books of the Western World. And we'll have an episode on that and why it's significant to our channel. But essentially, in brief, the idea is that across time and the ages, there has been this sort of hyperlinked conversation in the Western world that has been going on, whether or not certain intellectuals or philosophers or scientists or religious practitioners or whoever were or were not aware that was going on, that they were all participating in. And the more that, the literature expanded, people were writing books, talking about their ideas, dying for their ideas, going to war for their ideas. These classic texts emerged and affected swaths of humanity across time. And when analyzed objectively from a sort of upper level, all-encompassing perspective, you can see that there actually truly is a conversation occurring between groups of people across the land, across the whole earth, and across time periods. And participating actively in that conversation consciously is what we really want to participate in, is what we want to engage in, and we want to encourage everyone to try to study, learn, think critically, and participate with your, fellow humanity, fellow people, and join in this great discussion.
Because ultimately people participate in that conversation a lot less these days, and we kind of feel like people, not everybody per se, but some people take for granted the idea that there was this whole multitude of ideas that really manifested this era that we have now. And it's kind of like our responsibility to maintain that conversation if we want to maintain the progress that we've inevitably encountered in this era. So
right. Yeah. And in doing so consciously, right? Because as we get deeper into what the great conversation is in other videos, you'll see that it's not always a conscious move.
Right.
Things that we do have effects no matter what, whether we intended for those actions to have effect or not.
Anybody who's on social media is participating in the great conversation, but they just might not be necessarily doing it in a conscious way.
Right. And they may never emerge to be a famous individual whose words are studied for all posterity, but you're still part of that entire process, regardless. And so doing it consciously is important, we think, at least.
Yeah, and we don't want to undermine the idea of the individual, because at the lowest level of a society, we're all individuals, and so we really do believe that you at an individual level, with the words that you say and the ideas that you espouse, can have a great impact on the whole.
And so that kind of brings us forward as well, I guess, to the next tenet of our philosophy that we sort of highlighted in brief before, which is integral philosophy. Mm-hmm. Integral philosophy is, a great idea, huge. We'll discuss it again in future videos. But another philosopher that I highly regard, that I think Connor does as well, his name is Ken Wilber. He actually is still alive today, and his books are here behind me right there, as well as more of Mortimer Adler's books. And integral philosophy is very difficult to describe, but Ken Wilber's ultimate goal was to create a unified theory, as does almost every person in the postmodern world tries to do, it seems.
Integral theory to me is an attempt to encapsulate and amalgamate all ideas into one unified theory. So it's taking bits and pieces of ideas and finding out where utility exists and combining it all to be able to see it as one.
Yeah, I mean, that is essentially what it is. In Ken Wilber's, I guess, entire body of work, it's very deep. It's a very great idea, again, but essentially that is what it is. It's akin to the perennial philosophy, sort of, which is another sort of New Age-ish term, came out in the last century or whatever.
Right.
But essentially, it's just that you're taking ideas across cultures. You're looking at, but not even just ideas. I guess to describe it in brief, in Wilber's philosophy, there's something called AQAL, or all quadrant, all level, AQAL. Really, what it is, it's a 4-quadrant grid that displays graphically that all ideas, all things exist on multiple spectrums of reality. So you have physical space, atoms and bodies and biology, and then you have culture, and you have mental spaces and minds and emotions, and you've got meaning and architecture, and there's so many levels that sort of intertwine. And any concept, any argument, any idea, any political view, any instance occurring right in front of you in your reality has multiple modes of existence. And trying to look at any of those things for all of their modes of existence at once is very much his philosophy. It's integral, holistic.
And it's quite the endeavor.
It is hard. It's very difficult. And that's why we are going to talk a lot about it on the channel, and why I aspire to live my life that way, as a holistic, integral philosopher. But yeah, again, we're not going to get into that today. But
we will be doing future videos on integral theory. We'll go much more in depth. So look out for that. Should we talk about discourse for a little bit?
Yeah. And the last thing I'll say is the reason why we care so much about integral philosophy is because it's natural. It goes hand in hand with the idea that you should be open to other ideas. It goes in tandem, hand in hand with that.
Right. And at a metaphysical level, life is integral because you can't deny certain aspects of existence. So this is just an attempt to quantify that.
Yep, exactly. So yeah, and that leads us to the last topic of videos again that we're going to be discussing, which is the discourse.
Right.
Again, shout outs to TDD in the past, but we are moving forward from that. And let's kind of unpack that a little bit. Again, those are going to be standard podcast type videos and audios in which either, again, Connor and I just together talking amongst ourselves about crazy ideas, in which you can engage in the comments, and then eventually, jump on the show with us and we can actually have a conversation together, whether it be a debate or maybe some clarification on things that we said, or maybe you just have a completely new idea that we've never heard of or that we're really interested in learning from you. And we have a number of guests lined up already, and you can be part of that for sure. Just shout out.
We would love to have you
in the comments. We're always willing to engage with viewers. But yeah, so let's unpack the discourse a little bit.
Well, I touched briefly on the fact that I get a guttural reaction anytime I hear someone say the word settled science, because fundamentally that's just not how science works. Sure. Science is the constant questioning of things, and pretty much most of the times throughout human history that we've come across something that was considered settled science, it's later on been either disproven or
reevaluated.
Yeah, or reevaluated and expanded upon. So I really don't like the idea of people saying, well, you have to trust the facts, because facts are malleable and they're ever changing and they are contextual. So I think that's really important to delineate. And, also we live in a time where people are treating ideas like they equate to the people who are espousing them. And we see that a lot with cancel culture. Like, you can literally be canceled today for having an idea that's against somebody else's ideology.
Yeah. And so with that, people, and it's a very postmodern thing that we espouse the idea that facts are malleable, that facts can change. And some people agree with that and some people disagree with that to various degrees. And again, it depends on the context. If we're talking about metaphysics or gender or some other thing, some other spectrum of thinking about this idea of malleable facts and truths. Very postmodern.
Right.
And I bring it up in that way because so is the idea that your identity is your idea.
Right.
That's very postmodern in my opinion. And it's something that I criticize often that I want to highlight in the discourse by having discussions with other people. Because the problem in today's day and age, in my opinion, is that people have conflated their ideas for their identities. Where before we could have a discussion about ideas. Ideas exist in the cloud of all ideas. We could reach up there and pluck them, pull them down, roll them about in our palms and pass them back and forth.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for, taking my idea for a second, running with it. And then we play that game, and then we agree or disagree, and we neatly place the ideas back where they belong, and then we go about our day. And we don't hate each other. We're still brothers under the sun. You're still a patriot. You're still my American brother, and again, my brother under the sun. And these days, if you and I have discussion about an idea that you espouse or that an ideology that you cling to, or maybe even an idea that you just adopted yesterday, it seems as if, in general, if I disagree with you, you feel that I've somehow spat on your name.
Right.
That I've rubbed your name in the dirt, that I've come at you sideways, I've attacked you directly, I've disrespected you. And that's because instead of plucking those ideas from the cloud, talking about them and putting them back, we wear them like clothing.
Right.
And they are our identity. And I disagree with that. And so I think that that's what I'm hoping to highlight in the discourse, is that we can have ideas. We can play with ideas that we don't believe in. We can be open to discussion.
And I think any deviation from that really creates a new wave of tribalism, because I think for most of human history, tribalism was predicated on your race or your country or something arbitrary
something
like that.
In the physical.
Right.
Something anchored in the physical.
Exactly. But in this modern day, it seems to be predicated on a philosophy. And it's like, my team believes this.
It's
so
meta.
Yeah, any deviation from that is the enemy. And I think if we actually take the time to have deep consideration for the ideas of others, we'll grow more as individuals and we'll grow more as a society. So let me give you an example. Let's say an idea was instilled in me from a young age, and it's a bad idea. If I live in a society that frowns upon me expressing my ideas, I will never open myself up to have somebody give me an alternative perspective, and therefore I'll never grow.
Right. So it's definitely a very good reasoning to allow free speech in a society. You know what I mean?
Right.
There are a lot of philosophers out there who talk about free speech and it being more than just this fun, frolicky right that we all have in America.
Right.
But really it has utility, and that is that utility that we all have the opportunity to grow and learn from each other at the highest rate possible. And so I think that there's a lot to be said about our society today in the West and globally, in which conversations are happening less and less across the board. And so
go ahead.
We just, together, our shared vision is that we, at least in our peer group and the people that we touch in our lives, the people that we affect and that we are surrounded by, we hope to lead by example and participate again with you in the great conversation and in the discourse.
Absolutely.
And that being said about the discourse, there's really, in my opinion, two major ways to actually participate meaningfully in discourse. And I think that we should do one of those two. Of course, there's a lot of ways to have a discussion, but the major ways, in my opinion, are one, sort of like a battlefield, a debate, a competition of ideas in which I have my set sort of axioms and my postulates and my beliefs, and so do you, and we meet head on and we discuss them together, taking turns, and then we analyze each idea for what it is, and then we sling more of our ideas as rebuttals to those ideas, and then ultimately at the end of the day, we declare a victor, and hopefully the loser has changed their mindset and their worldview in order to better align with the winner. The other way in which I think is better is more to approach conversation holistically, to approach conversation casually. In this, and I say casually in the sense that really we, instead of paying attention necessarily to the ideas themselves exactly, and we try to logically break them apart and be the victor in sort of a sophist sort of sense, we approach conversation by looking at the values of what people are bringing to the table. Why are you saying the things that you're saying? Where did you come up with these ideas? How did you become this way? And what are the values that you're actually saying without saying in your arguments? And if we can more align to our values as we speak to each other, yes, we should still have debate, and if you are espousing some craziness and you get beaten in a debate, yes, you should probably change your worldview. But I think that's part of what also keeps us polarized.
Right.
Because we're not really paying attention to each other as people. We're approaching each other as opponents on a battlefield of ideas, which really, if we can source and trace back the origin of those ideas and the values that are silently behind those ideas, we'll better be able to come to terms with each other. And then those debates can be facilitated in a light that's not so much about victors and losers, but brothers and sisters and people who are just trying to learn as best as they can.
Right. And I think there's utility in denigrating bad ideas, but I think what constitutes a bad idea is actually pretty complicated.
Yeah.
A lot of the times the ideas that one might think is good is the other person thinks that they're bad, and we have to really be able to talk it out to figure out which one is which, or whether or not it's just somewhere in the middle, which I often find to be the case. And that really highlights the utility of the classroom. I mean, education was really predicated on the idea that everybody's ideas are in the pots and we all talk it out, and then we all end up better as a whole. And that's why education, at least for most of human history, wasn't just, here, let me give you this book and then I'll test you on it later. It's no, we're all gonna talk and we're all gonna figure this out. And
right. And like a sort of a Socratic seminar.
Right. Exactly.
And and Mortimer Adler, again, the man who's behind this wonderful set of books behind me, that was his entire philosophy, the Padilla principle. He definitely was all about self-education, and education in the classroom and how to properly do that. And again, the great conversation is a huge part of that, and having discourse with others. Yeah, and I think we kind of fleshed it out as best as possible.
Absolutely.
These are, among others, among our entire philosophy, these are the greatest tenets, the most foundational. So we wanted to highlight them in this video, kind of let you know, again, what we're about, why we're doing what we're doing, why we're so passionate, what we're attempting to achieve, and the impact that we're hoping to make on the lives of people around us, and as well as we grow. Because we don't want to be pedantic either.
Right.
We don't want to just sit up here and give lectures and tell you how it is. We really want to engage with you and with each other. And we learn as much as we teach on this channel. And that's a huge part of my life, is trying to learn as much as I can as I'm teaching and learn from the students. And myself being a student, in reverse, I'm always trying to learn from you, So, and ultimately that is the spirit of Discourse. So that's what we're trying to get across with the archive. And again, we are in the archive, all of these books. One day we'll do a video where we show you all of the books that we have. Connor has a bunch too at his place.
Not nearly as many as in here, but
It's cool though.
Yeah,
you got plenty of books.
yeah. All right. Well, on that note, we would just like to thank you guys for sticking with us through to the end of the video, as well as sticking with us through this whole rebuilding and rebranding process. We hope we didn't bore you guys too much by talking about ourselves, but we do have some riveting content, and we really hope you guys enjoy it.
Yeah, and thank you for being patient and hanging out with us. I know it's been a long journey and a long road, and we keep saying we're coming, and we're here now, so thank you again.
And thanks again for joining us and continuing the great conversation.